Speak to Trevor Kavanagh, former political editor at The Sun, who worked for Mr Murdoch for many, many years. Trevor, afternoon to you.
Hello, Ian.
I've made this point already, but it is worth saying again. You can't really overstate in any, even if there are people who say, well, I didn't like that newspaper, I didn't like that channel, but I quite like that bit, etc. Mr Murdoch, of course, would support that diversity of thought, etc. That's what he was all about. But nobody anywhere in any corner of the globe could overstate the impact that one man could have on global media and journalism.
No, and you have to think back to the point that he took over this tiny newspaper that he inherited from his father, Keith Murdoch, back in, which was 72 years ago. He was 21 when he took over as the proprietor of this tiny newspaper and turbocharged it by the most relentless energy and dynamism into the biggest single media company on earth. And he did that at a time when everything was by sort of scheduled jets. He didn't have a private jet. He simply traveled on whatever aircraft was available, spent most of his life in the air, moving from one city in the world to the next, looking for buying opportunities. And he took on roles and business opportunities which nobody else would have touched at the time. They were seen by the people who were selling them as perhaps cast-offs that they didn't really want. And he saw the opportunity and the potential in those cast-offs and not only transformed them into success stories, but such big success stories that they eclipsed the people from whom he bought them. And he ended up actually owning the companies that they thought were the jewels in their empire, plus everything else that he accumulated over an amazing period of, as I say, 70 years of almost perpetual motion.
And again, it should just to factor into what you were saying there in terms of, working hard and putting in the hours. The other aspect, of course, of Mr Murdoch's time as chair was that he knew where every nut and bolt was in the company. He knew what was going on. He knew what stories were breaking. This wasn't a backseat driver.
No, he knew pretty well everything that was happening and made sure that his chief executives reported to him so that he was aware and he had all the information for him at his fingertips and was constantly on the telephone from wherever he was in the world to whoever was in charge at whatever time of day he decided to call to find out what sort of progress or otherwise was being made. The other key factor about Rupert Murdoch that I think is obvious in hindsight, but not at the time, was that this very modest, understated, softly spoken man was possibly the finest commercial gambler of his era. And he could almost see round corners at opportunities that eluded others and turned them into spectacular successes. And for instance, Sky Television, which he took on against the giant of Sky B, which was the establishment favourite, and beat them to the punch and turned it into not just the most successful new satellite television broadcasting organisation, but also transformed the sporting world with the sponsorship of Premier League football and in America, the National Football League. These were big, big gambles. People assume in hindsight that this was just ready for the taking, but it wasn't. It practically bankrupted the company when the world economy suddenly turned sour back in the 80s, and the people who were to whom Murdoch was a AAA-rated creditor suddenly started calling in their money to save their own skins. And it was only at the literally the last knockings that Mr. Murdoch managed to clinch deals which saved the company and forged the future, which was from then on unbroken success.
What is your own experience then, Trevor? I mean, you've been around the Fleet Street block for many, I don't want to date you or anything, Trevor. You're still a young buck, frankly. I know that in heart and mind. But nonetheless, you've been around a long time and you worked for this company for a long, long time. What are your own experiences and exchanges with the man himself?
Well, I've been with the company since the days in Australia 50 years ago. I've been with The Sun for 45 years. I was political editor for nearly a quarter of a century. And I I have come across Rupert Murdoch both as a proprietor and as a close acquaintance. I'd like to claim that I was a friend of Rupert Murdoch. He's got many friends. But the thing that struck me about Mr. Murdoch was the fact that he is such a courteous individual to people who he meets on normal terms. I think that he's a tough and flinty-eyed boss when it comes to his own investments and his editors and chief executives, but he's an amazingly modest man when he comes in touch with the ordinary members of his staff. And when he visits Wapping or News International headquarters now in London Bridge, he mixes with them on a very amiable, equal terms basis. And I think that's the characteristic of possibly an Australian of his generation.
Yeah.
There are no sort of cards. There's nothing special about him in his mind, except, of course, that he is very special.
Yeah, it's interesting, and from time to time, of course, obviously, still to this day, despite being 92, making those trips around the planet, checking in on various aspects of his own business and companies. And when I've seen him in this building, on those occasions, walking through the reception, going back to his car or coming in, there's always a nod and a smile for the security staff and the people sitting on reception. And, I know that many would say, well, that's how life should be, but we so often see people in the highest echelons of their own industry, in this case media, who don't do that. But for him, he's always managed to find those moments to make sure that those that work around him at whatever level are acknowledged that they do actually exist, and the man himself sees it.
Yes, I mean, for a man, a very, very busy man with operations going on basically on every continent on Earth, 24 hours a day, 24/7, he is always ready for a chat and to learn things. He has incredibly remorseless inquisitiveness. He likes to learn new things, and you could say it was gossip, you could sort of call it business information, but he's eager to learn new things, and that, I think, is one of the marks of his success, that he has seen around corners in ways that other businessmen have missed, and seen opportunities that they might have looked at and dismissed, and worked out that actually they're wide open opportunities. And I mean, you have to remember that at one point, Rupert Murdoch employed something like 50-odd thousand people on his payroll. He made a joke once that at any given point, someone was having lunch somewhere in the world at his expense. And he's probably right, and I'm pleased to say that I was at one time one of them. Yeah. So, I mean, look, he has amazing energy and also shrewdness. The thing that you can never do when you're speaking to Rupert Murdoch is assume that you know more than he does, because he invariably has spoken to someone only 10 minutes earlier than you who knows a lot more.
Indeed. And it's interesting, I'm always very defensive of particularly tabloid journalism, which I know it's very easy for somebody to have a swipe, but of course it is by far the purest, cleverest form of journalism, and has the greatest impact as well.
I mean, one of the saddest things in my view is that Rupert Murdoch has not been given the credit that he deserves for the contributions he's made to the newspaper industry, to television, to broadcasting, and basically the media industry worldwide in his 70-odd years at the helm. And they've been very, very significant and deserve the credit that, because of the tendency of the left to denigrate anybody who succeeds on the right, has not been the deserts that he is entitled to. Yeah. But I think that he is a colossus, not only in business, but in the generation of news and in the support of newspapers and journalists in particular, individually, as a profession. And I think that is the testimony to a man whose contribution continues, and I hope will continue for many years to come.
And we often talk about, you know, representing the voice of the man on the street, as we do here at TalkTV. That was very much him. He hated pomposity. He didn't like that kind of hierarchical thing that, you know, certainly the United Kingdom has done very well, the whole kind of royal thing. You know, it wouldn't be his #1 dinner date, breaking bread with a king, etc., although, of course, he's done all of that. But I think it is worth just mentioning when people, you know, like to take a swipe at success. They like to take a swipe at, you know, tabloid headlines and, you know, areas that news goes to and has to go to from time to time. But if you wanted to, you know, ask a media student, do a list of those victories that papers like The Sun or the Insight column at the Times, the Sunday Times, have a look at some of the characters that have been flushed out of their illegality, criminality, all manner of it, whether it's in the world of politics, show business, pricking the balloon of hypocrisy and exposing and shining a light onto all those areas of life where light needs to be shone. I mean, that list is pretty much endless over the last 50 years, Trevor.
I think it is, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Ian, that this is a man who, perhaps largely because of his egalitarian Australian background, does not believe in the class system. Nobody is immune from the gaze of the media, which is, in, I think, Rupert Murdoch's view, an absolutely essential part of our democratic process. Without free speech, you do not have democracy, and without a free press, you do not have free speech. And I think that the one thing that I've experienced while working on The Sun and for International News Corp is that if a story is a story, it doesn't matter who it involves, whether it's friends of the company or people who would like to be friends of the company or the newspaper. If a story is there, we will run it, and we will run it fearlessly.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is the sort of, I think, the equality that goes with the sort of background of an Australian businessman is different to that of those who live even in the classless society of America, but particularly in the class-ridden world of the UK still today.
There it is. Trevor, great stuff from you. Thank you as ever.